everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres. And this morning, I'm going to be talking about the next thing that we have to think about when we think about gardens, and that is germination. Now, the last time we talked, Henry and I were both sitting here together, and we were talking about forget about your New Year's resolutions, use your calendar, and block in what's going on. We talked about our personal calendar and your potential calendar, whatever it might be. Do you have volunteer things that you're responsible for? Do you have business things you're responsible for? The first thing you do is put those on the calendar. And once you're done with those, you need to understand what's going to be happening with your plants. Germination, it's not a difficult concept. It just means that you're going to take your seeds and you're going to turn them into seedlings. And when I was thinking about this little talk I was going to give on the video, I was thinking about how I could explain things to people without being scary. Because if you're new at this, the whole prospect can be sort of scary, especially if it means a lot to you, especially if you really want to grow some veggies for the first time, or even just some flowers for the first time. Some people can get kind of wrapped up in, oh gosh, I might fail. Well, I will guarantee I have killed as many plants as most people have. I do not have a brown thumb. I do not have a black thumb. I would say I come pretty close to having a green thumb. I have grown everything from corn and cabbage and tomatoes down to bonsai. And bonsai is definitely the pickier of those two things, those three things rather. And that's one of those things that you don't goof off on, because if you do, your plants are dead or badly injured. And yeah, when we lived in New England, we used to have bonsai, and I adored them, and it was awesome. And yeah, I had seen them for centuries, it seemed like, when we lived in California, so this is something I really wanted to do. And I did. But I didn't do it instantly. I had to do some research. I had to find out what was going on. And that's sort of what we're doing here. But we're trying to keep it simple so it's not scary. So you want to start a seed. What do? Well, obviously you buy the seed. Why have you chosen that seed? Well, I assume it's something you'd like to either eat or look at. Okay? And I highly recommend, when you're choosing your seeds and varieties and stuff, and we'll talk about this a lot more in our session on varieties, choose something you like. Don't grow a vegetable that you won't eat or that your family hates. That seems pretty logical to some people that you wouldn't do that. But the number of people I have heard say, well, I could see my neighbors growing this and it grew well for them. Well, do you like it? No. Then why did you waste your time and effort? Seriously, we only have so many years on this earth. Don't waste them doing something you hate to do any more than you have to. I know we all have jobs occasionally that we don't love, but save that for your focus of unhappiness. Don't spread that unhappiness into your garden too. So I've got my seed. I've chosen something I really want to grow. How do I do it? Well, obviously I'm going to need, that seed needs things in order to become a plant. And what does it need? It needs moisture. It needs something to keep that moisture in. And it doesn't have to be dirt, but it needs to have something to keep that moisture in. At some point, it's going to need light, and it depends on which seed you're talking about as to how soon that will be. And it's also going to need a temperature range. In other words, if it's 32 degrees, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that would sprout at 32 degrees. Not a seed. There could be something out there that grows in Siberia or something that I'm not familiar with, but most of the normal vegetable seeds that we grow and flower seeds that we grow are more temperate climate. A significant percentage of our vegetable actually come from the Mediterranean area or South America. So while there is stuff that's specifically developed in Europe, the vast majority of what we grow is pretty close to tropical in terms of what it prefers. So you've got your temperature, your moisture, your sun. You'll notice I didn't mention fertilizer. And the reason I didn't mention fertilizer is your seed, think of it as a little suitcase. It has everything in there that it needs to grow to a seedling except for the water and the temperature. Okay, so you've got your little suitcase full of seed, and when you put it in whatever your medium is, that means your dirt, your perlite, whatever it is, you're going to have everything there that you need until that plant develops true leaves. Now, what do I mean by true leaves? Okay, if you've ever watched seeds come up, any kind of seeds, a lot of the seedlings, when they first pop through the soil, look an awful lot the same. You know, I always make a big deal when I'm doing a video about planting seeds that, especially when I'm planting a specific group, a specific family groups, like say tomatoes or cabbages, brassicas, anything in the cabbage family, I want to make sure that I have everything labeled. Why? Because all the seedlings look pretty darn close when they first pop up. And I'm not going to be able to look at one tomato leaf and say, ah, that's definitely a big beef, and ah, that's definitely an invincible. No, it's going to look like a tomato to me. I'm going to be able to look at that and say, oh, that's a tomato, that's not a cabbage. But that's all I'm going to be able to tell. So you need to have the stuff labeled if you're growing more than one variety, and you need to understand what it needs. Now, what do I mean by what it needs? If I were to go to one of the seed sites, one of the companies like Haas Tools or Johnny Select Seeds, some of the other companies have it to some extent, but they'll give you information. And I'm going to pick on two different varieties right away because it gives me something to work with in terms of specific, suggestions. So one of my favorite cabbages that we've been growing for quite a few years is Tiara. It's sold by Johnny's, and it produces 1 to 2 pound heads. Now, those are small heads as cabbage goes. I mean, a lot of heads could be this big, but there's just 2 of us here, so a Tiara cabbage is a good size for us. It gives a nice, really dense head, about that big. Perfect for coleslaw, cabbage soup, that sort of thing. It's a very sweet cabbage, super delectable, doesn't split easy. All the things you want as a home gardener. Holds well, too. It holds pretty darn well in the field, or in the greenhouse, wherever you're growing. So you've got this thing. And my packet will have instructions on it. It says I should, let me see if I have the Tiara here. Yep, I do here. It says, well, here's one of the things that be more important later when we're talking about varieties and stuff and buying seeds. One of these packets has 100 seeds in it, okay? Now you may think, oh my Lord, 100 seeds is 100 heads of cabbage. What am I going to do with all of that? Well, that's something you'll definitely need to think about. So if you're getting something that has that many seeds in it, you need to figure out where you're going to store them to keep them good for the next year, because cabbage is one of those things that will last for several years if you take good care of the seeds. That means don't leave them in the sun, keep them in a dark, cool area. It does not have to be refrigerated. Some people will push it all the way to the freezer. I never have, but I try and keep them as steady a temperature and out of the sun as I can. I will never leave these around the greenhouse when I'm working. They come out with me, they get used, and they go back in the house immediately. But it tells me that I should be planting these guys 1/4 inch deep. Okay. Now I remember off the top of my head that some of my green beans will tell me to plant them 1 inch deep. Big difference. So when you're going to plant something, read the packet. It'll tell you something like how many you should put in a container. And it'll usually talk, like Johnny's will always talk in terms of per cells for different size plug flats and stuff. They are dealing mostly with lots of home gardeners, but serious home gardeners. They are also dealing with a lot of truck farmers and small farmers. We're not talking about the 3,000 acre guys, generally speaking, but we're talking about a lot of those intermediate sized farmers who do make a living off of farming or make a significant percentage of their income off of farming. And therefore they need to know, like it says on here, 500 seeds will plant a 250-foot row, and 100 seeds will plant a 50-foot row. Not something your average gardener needs to know, but it'll also have information like how far apart. Tiara is a mini cabbage, so I can plant these guys, let's see, they recommend you transplant. That's another important thing to know. So that means I'm putting it into soil or some medium, I'm watering it, I'm getting them up to a certain height, and then they say the seedling should be ready to transplant in 4 to 6 weeks. Important thing to know, that'll come into your calendar issues. That'll come into, okay, is my soil location that I'm going to be ready? Okay. If it's just a pot with soil in it, pretty easy. If it's just soil outside, I need to make sure that that soil outside is warm enough or cool enough, depending on what time of the year I'm dealing with, and moist enough, and that I'm ready to water as soon as I get those guys out there. So that's all part of your calendar thing. And if you're just, like we said yesterday, if you're just a person who wants to have 2 pots, one has a tomato in it and one has a pepper in it, or something like that, there is no sin in that. That is way more than 9/10 of the population is doing. So go for it and grow something fun. But you still might want to know some of this information in case you wanted to do something like, plant a few flowers around the base of your tomatoes and peppers, or maybe a couple of radishes in there. There's an awful lot of bare space around the bottom of a tomato or a pepper plant if you put it in a decent sized pot. And I do recommend a decent sized pot because it'll be happier that way. If you put it into a tiny pot, it's going to keep it a lot more constricted, restricted, everything else. And it's going to make it a lot harder to keep it moist. And remember, one of those critical things for growth is water. So it says 4 to 6 weeks. If possible, keep the soil temperature over 75 degrees until germination, reducing to about 60 degrees to grow plants. That may seem a little bit picky. I have actually got a chart about the Tiara cabbage, and it's just a graph. But what it shows is the temperature at which Tiara cabbage seeds starts to germinate, and then how well it germinates. So if it was 55 degrees, you might have 1 or 2 plants that would germinate. If they did germinate, it would take a lot longer for them to germinate. Your goal as a gardener is to get that seed in there and give them the best opportunity that you can to grow quickly. And that chart shows it goes, at this temperature, your germination rate is low, then it goes up, and at some point you reach maximum germination in terms of the efficiency of the environment, assuming you have the proper water. And then it starts to go back down again. So when you get to really high temperatures, what that means is either it will germinate not as well, a smaller percentage will germinate, or it may not germinate at all. You may actually kill the seeds. Another thing that it can cause is a thermal, we've called it several different silly things. I'm trying to think what they actually call it. It goes into stasis. It goes into like hibernation. So lettuce will do that sometimes. If your soil if you've ever planted lettuce seeds in the middle of the summertime and they just didn't come up, and then 3 months later when it cooled down, all of a sudden your lettuce pops up, usually by that time in some odd place because you've used the soil for something else. That's what happens there. It's thermal shock, basically. The seed has decided this is not an environment in which I can survive, so I'm not going to grow. And it will just shut down. And we've had that happen before with lettuce. We've also had it happen with some brassicas before. That means anything in the cabbage family. It can be really frustrating because you're like, what did I do wrong? Was it wet enough? Was it dry enough? Was it, and you just confused the seeds is what you did. So there is a temperature range which is kind of ideal. And that can vary from seedling to seedling. Like I say, Johnny's just telling us here 75 degrees. Haas does not usually have that information on their seed packs, but I know that they have it in their computer stuff. With Haas's stuff, that's where I get the information. It'll say it likes to germinate at this temperature best, and and it'll tell you that sort of stuff. So most of your good companies, well, I shouldn't say that. There's some companies out there that are pretty decent. Their seed quality is pretty decent, but they don't give you this kind of information. There is another thing that you need to be aware of, and these two here, these are both from Harris Seeds. These were specialty seeds, so I had to scrounge around to find them. They both have special circumstances involved in them, and it says it on the package. But you have to read the packages, because if you go to plant this stuff and you haven't read the packages, you might have a delay in planting that just doesn't fit your schedule. For instance, this is Rudbeckia. It's black-eyed Susan. I had a very hard time last year finding anybody who had Rudbeckia seeds. Most people apparently either get them as cutting from neighbors or they will get them as live plants. Well, I hadn't been able to find any good ones around here for like 3 or 4 years. I mean, that's before, there has been any issues with supply chains. This year I got them, and I read the package, and it says, culture, pre-chilling the seed at 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 weeks will enhance germination. Cover with seed lightly with vermiculite for moisture control. Okay, now what does that mean I do with that? Well, in my case, it means this goes in the cheese drawer. That's where we keep our seeds, so they don't wander around in the refrigerator. But if you're running a refrigerator at the temperature that the government recommends you run it for health and safety reasons, your refrigerator should not be much warmer than 40 degrees, because it will not keep your meat cold enough to keep it from spoiling fast, and your veggies will do better at 40 degrees too. In fact, some veggies like cabbages and stuff, when you're actually storing those long term, they recommend you store those at like 32 degrees with the right amount of moisture. But that's a whole nother story. Anyway, so the Rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susan, needs to be pre-chilled. And there was something else this year, and I don't remember what the heck it was. But I tried that on a couple of other seeds too, on the theory that maybe that was what was wrong with them and why they weren't germinating. Now, these were all fancy flower seeds. I can't think of, I will put it that way, I cannot think of a vegetable seed that needs to be pre-chilled. Now, pre-chilling may sound funny to people, but if you think about it, all that means is if it was out in the wild, it went through winter. Okay? That's all that pre-chilling is doing to this. It's telling these seeds that winter's over now, and you can come out and play. That's literally what it means. So these seeds require pre-chilling in order to have good germination. Otherwise, the plants might think, oh, we're just having a warm spell, and if I come out now, it's not going to work well. It also mentions on here, cover seed lightly with vermiculite for moisture control. Now, what I had seen with some other sources of information on Rudbeckia is that they are light sensitive. And that brings in this one too. This is a strawberry that is both a producer of pretty flowers and also produces edible strawberries. It's also from Harris Seeds. And one of the things I should note on this one has, the Rudbeckia last year had a high germination rate. It was a 95%. This one has an 86%. There are some specialty plants that have really pretty crappy germination rates. Most of your quality seeds from good sources, like this one from Haas, this is a broccoli, 94% germination. Okay? What that tells you is the seeds were healthy to start with, and they have been stored properly. Now, once you get them, it's on you as to what you do with them. Don't leave them in the sun on the windowsill while you get around to planting them. Don't get them wet and dry a couple of times before you get around to planting them. Keep them cool and in the dark if you can. You need to be aware that there are some seeds that simply, especially some of your specialist things, that simply do not have a high germination rate. And that's usually, like I say, the flowers. I don't know of anything like that in veggies, but certainly in flowers. And we do some specialty flowers and things. Okay, so my packet says, culture. Do not cover seeds as light is required to germinate. Keep significantly moist. Okay, now this guy here, the Rebecca, is saying cover with vermiculite for moisture control. If you know anything about vermiculite or perlite or any of those other light, fluffy mineral products, they have no nutrition in them. They're super lightweight, so it makes it super easy for the seed to pop. They help to retain moisture, but they do allow light to come through, or any kind of light to come through. And there are seeds that require light in order to germinate. So if they are buried, like this guy, do not cover seeds. You could sprinkle, I would probably sprinkle perlite on this. Perlite is white. It looks like smooshed up popcorn from the storage peanuts. It's not. It is actually a type of mineral that has been cooked in the oven and expanded and then crushed down to reasonable sizes for us to use. It's a great way to retain moisture. Vermiculite is a different mineral that has been expanded in an oven, and it does the same sort of a thing. I would choose the perlite because it is white and therefore will transmit more light, but both of them have some of the same things. It helps to hold the moisture in. It looks really funny because it looks like it kind of snowed on top of your vegetable seeds. But what I actually did with these guys is I did not put any soil on top of them. I did sprinkle the perlite on top of them because it is hard in a dry climate like ours to keep the surface of the soil moist, and these seeds are on the surface of the soil. I did not have great germination on these last year. I will try it again this year because it's something that does interest me. And I think what I did last year was I wound up putting them in too big a flat. In other words, when you're growing veggie seeds and you're using grow flats, you'll have a whole stack of cells that you put your dirt in, or whatever your medium is for growing. And I always try to have the plants with the same requirements in the same flat. So, for instance, I would not put plants that are going to grow, to pop up and be ready to transplant in a week in the same flat as plants that are going to take a week to 2 weeks to even germinate. Because then I'm going to have to be working around, and especially if I've interspersed them, it could get messy in terms of having space. You know, if I put something like a summer squash, which normally under the right circumstances will pop up in 3 to 5 days, sometimes quicker if the soil and moisture is just right. And then I've got peppers in there, which might not pop up for 2 weeks, and husk cherries might not even pop up for 3 weeks. It's confusing the needs, and it makes it hard. And I screwed up and managed to get some of these strawberries in with something else that popped up faster than I thought it would. So they didn't get quite the TLC they needed. If I'm going to do something like the strawberries again this summer, what I will do is I will take a specific set of cells just for them. I will hold them aside and I will treat them as a separate entity so that I can control their environment very carefully. I'll be spraying them more often with a water sprayer. We get the inexpensive ones for Harbor Freight that are, I don't know, $9 or $10. They're probably more than that now. But before Before supply chain issues, they were $9 or $10, and or I'd get them on sale and I'd pick up 2 or 3. They're not going to last forever, but the one I'm currently using, I think it's either 2 or 3 years old. That's pretty good for $9 or $10. So, and I know I have a new one waiting in the wings in case that one decides to die. You will need to adjust them periodically because they will get clogged up. But that goes no matter how expensive a one you buy, they are still going to clog up sometimes. So I just assume buy the cheap ones. So before I overwhelm you with details, your seeds need moisture at the minimum, moisture, a temperature range that suits whatever the plant is, something to hold the seed so that it gets the moisture, and light. I mentioned a couple of other things that can interfere with germination. Not enough moisture will do it to you every time. Carrots, for instance, are picky. They want to be moist the whole time. One of these also said, the strawberry said, keep significantly moist. The Rudbeckia said, throw on vermiculite for moisture control. Most seeds need to be moist. And what I will do a lot of times, because I work from home, I can go out there 2 or 3 times a day and just literally spray the tops of the seeds with water, just plain water. No fertilizer necessary until the true leaves come out. So those first little leaves that pop out are going to be pretty innocuous, pretty difficult to tell what variety it is. Once they start to put on a leaf that's going to look like the leaf on the mature plant, those are the true leaves. That's when you need to fertilize them, and do it gently. Do not use some heavy-duty chemical fertilizer. I use a 20-20-20 and a microboost. That's all I give my seedlings when they're teeny tiny. You can get organic 20-20-20, or you can use the regular stuff. To be honest, I don't worry about it at that point. I do not believe that plants at that point in their existence know the difference between organic minerals and chemically produced minerals. If you want to get picky later, and I do, when I transplant them, they go into organic fertilizers. But I still will hit them with the 20-20-20 every once in a while because I know the quality of our soil here is poor, very poor. So I hope this gives you something to think about. I'm going to be talking a lot about how to choose varieties, what varieties we're growing, things like that. And there'll be a couple of sessions on that because that could be, like hours. But I hope you find this interesting. If you have specific questions, please ask. I'm just doing a talk through right now. At some point, we'll actually show some seeding. If you go to any of our old back videos, I've shown lots of seedlings going on in the past. I need to plant some carrots, kohlrabi, cabbage in the next week. Been wanting to do it for a couple of weeks, but right now it was 9 degrees last night, and I know it was about 28 in the greenhouse last night. So we're fine because I don't have anything fragile in there right now. But I have to be set up with heat mats and stuff to go on to the next phase of our existence. So be sure to come back because we got lots going on. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell because, hey, you're going to miss it if you don't. That notification bell will let you know whenever we put a new video out. So until next time, bye. And don't forget, keep brainstorming. That's how we get the things done that we need to do.